Week 1 is officially here. We have made it. We have games on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. But right now we are focusing on one of the biggest games on the Saturday slate. So here to help us break down Notre Dame and Texas A&M are our friends Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated and Carter Carrolls of Gig'em 24/7. Let's talk a little bit more about this top 20 matchup between Texas A&M and Notre Dame. Look at this. Notre Dame has played SEC teams kind of tight lately. 6 of their last 7 games against SEC opponents have been decided by just one score. For A&M. Despite the new head coach, they actually have some continuity, returning 9 starters on both the offense and defense. Let's start talking quarterbacks. And Tim, once again, Fighting Irish trot out a transfer quarterback, and this time it is Riley Leonard, previously at Duke. So I want to know, how is he set up for better success around him compared to last year's situation with a transfer quarterback?
Well, first of all, much different quarterbacks. Riley Leonard is a guy that wants to keep the football on the read option, whereas Sam Hartman didn't. But, I would say that Sam Hartman had a better offensive line, or certainly a more experienced offensive line going into the game going into the season last year. But I tell you what, Riley Leonard has much better receivers, a much deeper receiving core than they had. And, the thing that Leonard has going in his favor is his athleticism. We see him running here. He wants to run the football. He wants to keep the football on the read option. Sam Hartman was going to hand it off just about every time. And I really think that, Riley Leonard is set up for more success, partly because he wants to be at Notre Dame. And there were some questions in Hartman's mind whether he wanted to be there, number one, when Tommy Rees left as offensive coordinator, and number two, when he found out he had an inexperienced Jared Parker as his offensive coordinator. So Riley Leonard's in a much better position. Whether he's in a better position as far as the offensive line, I would say Hartman had the better of those two.
Yeah, we'll talk about the offensive line woes in just a bit. But while we're on the subject of people who were formerly at Duke, on the other side, you have Leonard's former head coach there, and Mike Elko. So, Carter, for those unfamiliar, what do Elko coach teams do well?
Well, when Mike Elko was at Duke, he did something that had only been done 2 other times since World War II, and that's win 9 games in his season at Duke. That was year number 1. Went in and beat Miami. The next year, he opens the season with a win against Clemson. So he shows up in big games. He has his team prepared. Something that we've seen this offseason with Texas A&M is just a complete and total culture change. When he took over the roster after A&M had fired Jimbo Fisher, it was kind of in shambles. A lot of guys had one foot out the door. You had a bad culture where accountability and showing up to things and being on time and things of that nature just weren't high priorities. And so he went in this offseason, hired Tommy Moffitt, who was a highly successful strength coach at LSU, and that had a big role in changing the culture in this program. And so I think you're going to see a team that is a lot more prepared, a lot more accountable. You'll see that when, not only when they're playing these big games, but also when they're playing the lesser opponents, whereas we've seen in previous years with this team where they haven't shown up for those games and they have a tendency to overlook some opponents. And then obviously Mike Elko, being a defensive-minded coach, that's his bread and butter. He, specializes in the secondary. So I think that's probably defensively where this team has the most room to grow is the secondary. And he went in this offseason, got 7 newcomers there from the transfer portal, 3 freshmen there. So he totally revamped the room, and I think it's a group that you're going to see improve quite a bit in year 1 under Coach Elko.
Tim, you had previously mentioned Notre Dame suffering some losses across the offensive line, and now they have to go up against a team in a conference that's really known for line of scrimmage play. So I know that the losses across the offensive line are going to affect the season as a whole, but how do they impact this game in particular?
Really, really difficult matchup for the first game for this offensive line. A total of 6 career starts, 3 by Ashton Craig at center, 3 by Billy Schroth. First-time starters, Emil Wagner, of course, their right tackle, left tackle, Anthony Knapp, a true freshman, left guard, Sam Pendleton, a redshirt freshman. I asked Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, how confident he was in the young guys in particular, the left side of the line being assignment correct. And he said, I have no worries about them being assignment correct. So that's a real positive for them. But what he didn't say, I think, is the flip side of that. Are they powerful enough? Are they strong enough to handle the Shamar line, as we call it, and Nick Scorton, who is absolutely outstanding at 6'4", 285. So assignment-wise, they'll be correct most of the time. What Mike Denbrock doesn't mention is whether they can just hold up physically play after play. There's certainly going to be plays where they can't do that, and he recognizes that. But at least they have the knowledge of the game, and that's partially why they won the job, is that they are assignment correct. So they have that going for them. But when you're going against 6'4", 285 Nick Scorton, it's going to take more than just being assignment correct to be successful.
It's interesting, Notre Dame obviously has been historically had a great offensive line. When we asked Mike Elko about it on Monday, he was kind of some gamesmanship, right? He's like, hey, if they're starting a true freshman, probably means he's going to be a first-round pick one day. But, I think Mike Elko probably knows deep down this is where the advantage is for his team. Tim talked about Nick Scorton. That's a guy who led the Big Ten in sacks last year and looks even better this offseason. And he did that on a Purdue defensive line where the focus was fully on him. What's he going to do on a defensive line where you can't fully focus on him? You can't quite double and chip him when you've got other guys on the line like Shamar Stewart and Shamar Turner. Shamar Turner is another guy to mention because this is somebody that was a second-team All-SEC player last year, and he did that despite playing out of position at defensive end and playing with two injuries that required surgery, a torn labrum and a shin injury. And so what's going to happen when he's playing in the right position, defensive tackle, and he's healthy if he can play at a second-team All-SEC level otherwise? So I think he's in for a huge year. And I think A&M probably thinks that, hey, 3 of these starting defensive linemen could be top 50 overall picks in the upcoming draft. And so when you have that kind of talent and you're going against an inexperienced defensive line, certainly you feel like you've got the advantage there. And Mike Elko, one thing that we've heard mentioned multiple times this offseason, just how creative he gets in these third and long packages, something where you could see some guys in spots where, you don't even know what's going to happen, right? You don't know where the pressure is going to come from. He gets pretty exotic on those sort of situations, and I think he's got the players to really dial up some interesting pressures on third down.
It's not just the talent, it's the scheme as well they're going to use to exploit that offensive line. Tim, we just talked about a concern that you have for Notre Dame, so let's do a positive. What's one part of this team that you're not worried about, you feel really confident in?
Well, I think it starts with Notre Dame's defensive line. That's why it's such an interesting matchup. Both teams go into the season with one of the top 10 defensive lines in the country. Howard Cross has been a little bit banged up. He suffered a hamstring tweak during the summer. Not really sure where he is. He needs to be at 100% or very close, because even though this is, I mean, I've been covering Notre Dame for 4 decades. You'd have to go back to the Holtz era to find a deeper group of defensive linemen than they have. And then I'd point to the secondary as well. I think Notre Dame, I think Al Golden and secondary coach Mike Mickens feels like the area on this team where they improved the most was during preseason camp, was in the secondary. Don Schuler is a redshirt freshman. It appears that he's beaten out Rod Hurd II, who's a transfer from Northwestern. Notre Dame doesn't take a whole bunch of transfers, and when they do, they're usually expected to start. And Hurd will play a multiple role for them, but Don Schuler has won the starting job. We know about Xavier Watts, the defending Bronco Nagurski Trophy winner. And then, of course, Benjamin Morrison, who's a junior, will probably leave for the NFL and be a first-round draft pick after this. So they feel good there. Christian Gray is a sophomore cornerback who looks to be on a similar path to Benjamin Morrison, if not a first-round draft choice, a real quality college cornerback. So they're really happy with what has developed on the back end. The linebackers are a little bit young, but you have Jack Kaiser, the veteran there. The linebackers are young, but there is a ton of talent there. So really on all levels of the defense, they feel really good about it. The linebacker core is a little bit more inexperienced, but on the front end and the back end, they feel really good about as they enter this season.
And just talking about the strengths of the Aggies real quick. Uh, I've talked a lot about the defensive line, but let's talk about the quarterback real quick, Connor Wigman, someone who's already kind of receiving that first round hype. You've seen ESPN, you've seen The Athletic project him to be a first round pick in 2025. Some people may say, hey, man, he's only started 8 games. Or where's this kind of coming from? A lot of it has to do with projection. A lot of it has to do with what he's shown in this small sample size so far. And you just go back to his true freshman year, had a pretty bad team and went in and beat the number 5 team in the country, LSU, as a true freshman. Had a great game against Ole Miss, and then the next year you saw what he did against Miami. It's just that small sample size. Needs to show it across a whole season, but he has all the makings of a quarterback who can lead this team to a lot of wins. Certainly can make all the throws, but something that he does, 2 things that I think will really help this team out is, one, he doesn't turn over the football. In his career, he's got a 16-2 touchdown to interception ratio. One of the interceptions was because it was tipped up in the air against Miami. And I think the other one came at the very end of the game in just a late game scenario where he had to kind of force it. So not a guy that's going to throw picks. And he also avoids sacks. This was one of the most pressured quarterbacks in the country through the first 4 weeks of last season, and the guy just didn't take sacks. And so his ability, not the craziest wheels, but he can extend plays. A former shortstop who can throw with different arm slots, can really get the ball down the field and push the ball down the field. So that's going to be a strength for this team. Running back, I think they're feeling a lot better about Le'Veon Moss and where he's kind of taken his game this offseason. I feel like he really showed something in the middle portion of last season. I think that the key with him is just staying healthy. He's been banged up throughout his career. Skill positions, definitely a question going into this season for A&M, but Noah Thomas is going to be probably the one who leads that wide receiver group. Someone that, at 6'6", with his length, that just brings a wide catch radius, can come down with those 50-50 balls in traffic, has the makings of someone who could be a number 1 receiver, and that's probably the biggest question mark with this offense. Can they get a number 1 receiver? I think it would be him if they have one. Defensively, I just can't say enough about where this secondary has gone since last season. I keep joking, like Tim Priester probably had 100 yards against the secondary last year if he lines up against them. But, this year it's a different story. Bringing in those guys, moving guys at a lot of different spots. Bryce Sanderson was a nickel last year. They move him to safety. I think that move's going to work out big time for that group. Tyreek Chappelle was a 3-year starter at field cornerback. Now he's making the move to nickel. I think that's going to be a more natural fit for him. And so a lot to like about the secondary, bringing in Des Riggs, bringing in Will Lee, lots of new names that I think are going to be key contributors for this secondary.
Sounds like we have 2 really talented quarterbacks and really talented defenses, so this game should certainly be exciting. Speaking of exciting, we got a little too anxious here at 24/7 Sports, so we actually simulated this game 20 times on EA College Football 25, and it was Texas A&M having the edge with 14 wins. So for each team, let's start with you, Carter. What is the key to pulling out a win in a very real football game in Week 1?
Yeah, look, I think this is going to be a low-scoring slugfest, and I think for A&M to have the advantage, it's their defensive line, right? That's going to be maybe the biggest advantage in the whole game. And if this defensive line gets 5 or 6 sacks or something crazy like that, nothing else really matters that much if they're that disruptive. Now, I do think the offense, with coming into the game with some questions at skill positions and going against such an elite Notre Dame defense, can't turn over the football, can't have a ton of 3-and-outs, can't shoot itself in the foot. So if this offense can just be functional and the defensive line can dominate the way that we think they can dominate, then I think that's a recipe for success for this A&M team.
I don't like to use a lot of cliches, but I think when it's an opener on the road in front of about 110,000 people, the turnover margin is going to be huge. And Notre Dame was +7 last year, and Texas A&M was -2. I don't know if referring to anything from last year is relevant with Texas A&M just because of the new leadership. But obviously, Notre Dame can't go into this game and lose the turnover battle 3-1 on the road. You'll get eaten alive if you do that. I've had a lot of people say, and a lot of Notre Dame fans talk to me about, well, they're going to have to pass protect Riley Leonard. There's no doubt about they have to do that, but you're going to have to be able to run the ball a little bit too. If Notre Dame can't run the ball effectively, it's just going to make it that much more difficult for Riley Leonard and a good receiving core. I should have mentioned the receiving core is one of the top things or the most improved things for Notre Dame this year. It's much deeper and much more talented than it was. But if you don't run the football, it's going to be a long day. And then flip side, like Carter, I'm extremely impressed with Connor Wigman. Hangs in there. Love how he hangs in the pocket. He'll take a hit. He's perfectly willing to take a hit to make the throw and follow through with the throw. He can run. He's not the runner that Riley Leonard is, but he has great escapability like Leonard does, and so he can keep plays alive. So Notre Dame has to stop the run. You can't let Daniels and Moss have a big day. I think, from what I've seen of Texas A&M's offensive line, I think it's a little bit underrated. I realize that they gave up a bunch of pressures last year, but in watching it myself, I think there's some pretty good players there up front, including Trey Zune, especially Trey Zune. So, Notre Dame's going to have to stop the run. If they can run the football and then that opens things up for Connor Wigman, it's going to be a long day, or I should say a long night for Notre Dame. I do think that Texas A&M has the advantage going into this game, and so the way you guys played it out, I could understand why A&M would have the advantage in 20 games played.
Well, don't worry, it was just a video game, not real life. That's why we get to play these games, and I'm so looking forward to this one. Thank you both so much for breaking down the matchup for us. You can keep it locked in to Irish Illustrated for all things Notre Dame football, and gig 'em 24/7 for everything that you need to know about Texas A&M. These writers you just heard from and their whole crew, they'll have you covered all season long.